Charleston, South Carolina, was a city steeped in history, with every corner of its streets whispering memories of bygone eras. For Marcus Jackson, however, those streets held another story, his own. Born and raised on the humbler side of town, he learned early on that the color of his skin was a lens through which many viewed him. Discrimination, even when disguised, was a constant presence, but Marcus always believed he could overcome any obstacle. After all, that's what his mother, Angela, always taught him. Angela Jackson was a strong, hard-working woman who raised her 2 children alone after her husband died in a car accident. She worked as a nurse at a local hospital and did everything she could to provide a better life for Marcus and his sister, Lena. One hot summer afternoon, Marcus was fixing his old bicycle, one of the few things that made him feel free, when Angela approached him. "You spend more time fixing that bike than riding it," she joked, wiping her hands on her apron. Marcus smiled but didn't look up. "It takes me away from all this. You know, the only thing I can really control." Angela sighed and sat down beside him. "I know things are hard, son. The world isn't fair, especially for a young black man like you. But you have a good heart and a good head on your shoulders. One day, that will take you further than any bike." Marcus finally looked up and met her gaze. "I don't just want to escape, Mom. I want to do something that really matters. Something that makes me feel like I belong." "And have you decided what that is?" Angela asked, already knowing the answer in her son's eyes. Marcus paused, looked at the bike, then back at his mother. "I'm going to enlist, Mom, in the Marines." Angela was silent for a moment, surprised, though she knew Marcus had always had a fighting spirit. She'd heard stories from friends whose sons had served, some who never came back home. But above all, she knew Marcus had the courage and determination to follow his path. "It's a tough decision, Marcus. You know you'll face more challenges than you can imagine, not just because you're black, but because the world out there is unforgiving. And I'll miss you so much." "I know, Mom, but I want to be more than just someone trying to survive here. I want to make a difference. I want to prove that it doesn't matter where I come from or the color of my skin. I want to serve my country, show that we can be more than they expect of us." Angela smiled, her eyes filled with tears but also with pride. "Then go and do what you have to do. But never forget where you came from. And don't let the world harden your heart, Marcus." He nodded, feeling the weight of her words. In that moment, the decision was made. He didn't want to just ride his bike to escape the life around him. He wanted to serve a greater purpose, prove he could overcome the limitations imposed by society by the color of his skin. In the months that followed, Marcus trained tirelessly for enlistment. He ran through the neighborhood streets with the same determination he used to fix his bike, always with one thought in mind. He would enlist in the Marines and make a difference for himself, for his family, and for all those who knew what it was like to be underestimated. On the day of his enlistment, he was accompanied by his mother and sister to the recruitment center. As he signed the papers, a mix of nervousness and excitement washed over him. Angela, standing beside him, squeezed his hand tightly. "I'm so proud of you, Marcus," she said, her eyes reflecting a mix of fear and hope. He smiled back, confident. "I'll make you even prouder, Mom. I'll prove we're stronger than they think." And with those words, Marcus Jackson began his journey, not just as a young man from Charleston, but as a future Marine. The military life awaited him, full of challenges, but he was ready. The world outside still saw him as someone limited by the color of his skin, but Marcus knew there was much more to him than that. And one day, he would prove it to the world. The heat of Charleston gave way to the cool breeze of North Carolina as Marcus arrived at the military training camp in Camp Lejeune. Stepping off the bus with other recruits, he felt the weight of the moment. He was finally there, ready to prove he was more than the limited expectations the world had for him. The days were tough. The physical training was exhausting, and the psychological demands were relentless. But Marcus was determined. He ran faster, lifted more weight, and endured more pain than many of his peers, always driven by one single thought. No one could underestimate him for being black. One night, after a grueling day of training, he and some of the recruits were in the barracks, sitting on their bunks, sharing stories from home. Paul Johnson, a young man from Texas, turned to Marcus. You always seem so focused, Marcus. I never see you falter or complain. What's your secret? Marcus, who was sitting in the corner, cleaning his gear, looked up and gave a slight smile. It's not a secret. Growing up where I did, you learn that faltering isn't an option. Every day, every choice is about surviving and proving you're more than what people think. More because you're black, right? Danny, another recruit, said without thinking, fiddling with his pillow. His tone was somewhat insensitive but curious. The barracks fell silent for a moment. Marcus looked up, feeling the weight of the question. He took a deep breath before answering. Yes, more because I'm black. More because out there, everyone thinks they know who you are before you say a word. And when you wear this uniform, you have to be twice as good. Not because you want to, but because it's the only way to be respected. Paul nodded in agreement. That's true. But hey, you're handling it. We all know you're going to go far here. The conversation shifted, but Marcus's words lingered. He always knew racism existed everywhere, even in the military. However, he was determined not to let it define who he was or where he could go. In the following weeks, Marcus was tested in every possible way. Physically, emotionally, and mentally. Marine training was a constant test of endurance. Endless runs, survival exercises, combat simulations, and amidst it all, Marcus stood out. During a group exercise, the drill instructor, Sergeant Phillips, watched as the recruits tried to lift a heavy barrier. Marcus's team was struggling to find a way to overcome the obstacle. The sergeant approached and, with his gruff voice, shouted, "Are you here to play or to become Marines? Come on, move. I need leadership." Marcus, sweating and breathing heavily, stepped forward. "Here's what we'll do, 2 on each side to balance the weight. I'll go first and help you up." The other recruits hesitated for a second, but saw the determination on Marcus's face. He climbed the structure with agility and, one by one, pulled his teammates up, ensuring everyone got over the obstacle without leaving anyone behind. Sergeant Phillips watched in silence, nodding with approval. "Good job, Jackson. That's what I want to see. Leadership. Keep this up, and you'll go far." Such words were rare from Phillips, but Marcus just nodded, not letting the praise get to his head. He knew he would have to keep proving himself, not just to his superiors, but to himself. Months passed, and Marcus graduated from basic training with honors, one of the best in his class. He had earned the respect of his peers and his superiors, but he knew the real challenge would come with the actual missions. The night before his first overseas mission, he called home, knowing his mom and Lena were anxiously waiting for news. Angela's voice came softly from the other end of the line. "My son, I knew you would make it. I'm so proud of you." "Thanks, Mom. But this is just the beginning," Marcus said, with a smile in his voice, even though the nervousness was palpable. "You're strong, Marcus. You'll do what you have to do and come home safe. Promise you'll take care of yourself?" "I promise, Mom," he said, his voice steady. "I'll make you proud." As the call ended, Marcus felt a mix of fear and determination. He was ready to face whatever lay ahead, knowing he carried his family's hopes and dreams with him. The world might still see him as limited by the color of his skin, but he knew there was so much more to him than that. And one day, he would prove it to the world. "I promise, Mom." Lena then took the phone. "Hey, big guy, don't go getting all tough now that you're a Marine, okay? I'm still gonna beat you in our bike races when you get back." Marcus laughed. "We'll see. But you're going to need a lot of practice to catch up with me, Lena." Hanging up the call wasn't easy. He knew his life could change forever in the coming weeks, but Marcus was ready. He had learned from a young age that life would always throw obstacles his way. The important thing was to keep pedaling, even when the terrain got steeper. Now, he was prepared to face the next challenge, but what he didn't know was that the greatest one was still to come. And it wouldn't be on the battlefields abroad, but on the streets he had always known as home. So, Marcus embarked on his first mission with a heart full of courage and hope, unaware that soon he would face a different kind of battle, one that couldn't be won with physical strength, but with the resilience of his soul and the power of his dignity. After 4 years serving as a Marine, Marcus Jackson returned home to Charleston, South Carolina. He had survived missions in war-torn countries, standing out for his discipline and bravery. However, setting foot on American soil again, he quickly realized that his greatest challenge would be reintegrating into civilian life. There was a strange sense of displacement, as if time had stood still for Charleston, but he felt like a completely different man. The first week at home was peaceful. Marcus spent his days resting, reuniting with his mother and sister, Angela and Lena, and feeling the relief of being away from the pressures and dangers of the battlefield. But as the days passed, he began to notice that the society he had left to serve his country had not changed as much as he had hoped. One day, he and Lena were in the backyard, chatting while she fixed a bike, now a living memory of the days before Marcus enlisted. "You seem lost," Lena commented as she turned the wrench in her hands. "I know it was tough out there, but it feels like you left something behind, and I don't think it was just on the battlefield." Marcus sighed, rubbing his hands on the back of his neck. "You're right. Out there, I knew my place. I knew what to do. Here, it feels like nothing has changed. I'm still the same Marcus, at least to most people. The black guy who doesn't get the respect he deserves." Lena looked at him with a sympathetic smile. "You're not the same, Marcus, and we know that. But I also know this place has a way of constantly reminding us of what they think we are. No matter how much you've done for this country, some people will still look at you and see only one thing." Marcus shook his head, resentful. "I know, but it eats me up. I wore the uniform, Lena. I risked my life. And still, I feel like here, I'm just another black man with something to prove." Lena stepped closer and put her hand on his shoulder. "Then keep proving it. Not to them, but to yourself. Show that you're more than that. You always have been, and I've always known that." Despite his sister's encouraging words, Marcus remained restless. He started going out more, rediscovering the streets of Charleston, biking as he did when he was younger, trying to find a sense of freedom that only cycling had always given him. But during these rides, he began to notice the looks. Whenever he passed through the wealthier areas of the city, it was as if he was being watched with suspicion. In cafes and stores, people treated him with a strange mix of disdain and distance, something he recognized all too well from before he enlisted. However, now it bothered him even more. He had served the country. Wasn't that enough to be treated with respect? One bright and sunny morning, Marcus decided to ride his bike to a park on the outskirts of the city. He wore his helmet, cycling jersey, and shorts. He was immersed in the wind and the freedom of the road when a police car appeared in front of him, cutting off his route. The officers got out of the car abruptly. Two white men with hard, suspicious looks approached Marcus, who was still standing, not understanding what was happening. "Hey, you there. Get off the bike," yelled one of the officers, his hand resting on his holster. Marcus, surprised, furrowed his brow but complied, dismounting the bike calmly. "What's going on? Did I do something wrong?" The other officer, more heavy-set, approached and started inspecting the bike without permission. "Is this bike yours? You think we don't know what you guys do around here? Looks like you stole this from someone." Marcus felt his blood boil. He was there in good faith, simply riding his bike, but he knew he was being judged solely by the color of his skin. He took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, but the feeling of injustice was overwhelming. "I didn't steal anything," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "This bike is mine. I'm just riding in the park." The first officer shook his head with disdain. "Riding in the park? With a bike like this? You guys always have an excuse, don't you? Let's see your ID." Marcus opened his backpack and took out his wallet, calmly removing his ID and, on impulse, his military identification. He handed the documents to the officer, who took them with an arrogant expression. When he looked at the military ID and saw the Marine Corps emblem, the officer frowned, as if trying to process the information. "Marine?" the officer muttered, visibly disconcerted. "You served in the Marine Corps?" "I did," Marcus replied, keeping his gaze steady. "And I've done more for my country than you can imagine." The two officers exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable. The second officer tried to soften his tone. "Look, we're not trying to cause trouble. We just have to make sure everything is okay. You know how it is?" Marcus felt the humiliation turn into a silent rage. Even after risking his life for his country, He was still treated like a criminal in his own city. He took his documents back, staying calm but firm. "Now that you know who I am, can I go on with my day?" The first officer hesitated but nodded. "Go ahead." Without saying another word, Marcus got back on his bike and rode away. But as he pedaled away, he knew this situation wouldn't end there. Something inside him had changed. He wouldn't let this go unnoticed. As he rode through the streets of Charleston, a decision matured in his mind. He would fight, not just for himself, but for everyone who had been through something similar. Marcus knew that this encounter was not an isolated case. It was a reflection of a much larger problem. And now, it was time to do something about it. Marcus's next step would be to sue the officers and the police department for racial discrimination. The indignation he felt needed to be turned into action, and he was determined to ensure that his story echoed as a powerful lesson to those who still judged others by the color of their skin. Marcus got home that afternoon, exhausted not from the physical exertion of the ride, but from the emotional weight of what had happened. He walked through the front door, still feeling the adrenaline pulsing in his veins, and found his mother, Angela, preparing dinner in the kitchen. "Hey son, how was your ride today?" Angela asked, not noticing Marcus's tense expression. He took a deep breath before responding, trying to contain his irritation. "I was stopped by 2 cops at the park." Angela stopped stirring the pot and turned to him, her face full of concern. "What happened?" Marcus sat down at the table, running his hand over his head as if trying to organize his thoughts. "They stopped me out of nowhere, treated me like a criminal, said I probably stole the bike. And they only let me go after I showed them my military ID." Angela was silent for a moment, absorbing her son's words. Her expression reflected both indignation and sadness. "That never changes, does it?" she murmured, her voice heavy. "You risk your life for this country, come back a hero, but here, they still see you the same way." Marcus nodded, feeling the frustration grow even more inside him. "They didn't see a man. They didn't see a Marine. They only saw my skin. And I'm tired of it, Mom." Angela approached and placed a hand on her son's shoulder. "I know, Marcus. This will never be fair. But what are you going to do about it? Are you going to let it slide?" He looked at her, and in that gaze, something changed. Marcus knew that letting it slide meant accepting the injustice, and that was something he was not willing to do. "No, Mom. I'm not going to let it slide." The next day, Marcus decided it was time to take legal action. He knew the path wouldn't be easy, but he also knew that if he didn't confront the situation, he would be allowing this kind of behavior to continue without consequences. He called a local attorney specializing in racial discrimination cases, James Wilkins, a man known for fighting for justice in police abuse cases. When Marcus arrived at James's office, he was greeted by a cordial secretary who led him to the conference room. James, a middle-aged man with thin glasses and a serious demeanor, welcomed him with a firm handshake. "Mr. Jackson, I've heard about your case, and I'm interested in hearing more details. Please, have a seat." Marcus sat down and recounted the entire story, from the police officer's approach to the moment they finally released him. James listened attentively, without interruption, taking notes as Marcus spoke. When Marcus finished, James leaned forward, clasping his hands on the table. "Unfortunately, this is more common than it should be. What you went through is what many black men and women face every day in this country. But the fact that you're a Marine makes it even more outrageous. This isn't just about race. It's also about respect for the service you've given." Marcus nodded in agreement. "I don't want them to get away with this. It's not just for me. It's for everyone who's gone through something like this. I want to fight, James." James smiled encouragingly. "I admire your determination, Marcus. We can sue them for racial discrimination and abuse of power. But you need to know that these cases aren't easy. The police will try to defend themselves with everything they've got. Are you prepared to face that?" Looking at the lawyer firmly, Marcus replied without hesitation, "I'm prepared. I've faced worse than this." James nodded, seeing the conviction in Marcus's eyes. "All right, let's gather the evidence. If you can remember the officers' names or badges, that would help us a lot. Also, we'll see if there are any security cameras in the park or nearby that might have captured the incident. We need to build a solid case." Marcus thought for a moment. "I remember one of their badges, and I remember the patrol car. It was Unit 327. James jotted down quick notes. Great. That will help. Now, leave it to me. I'll work on the case and keep you informed. And don't worry, we'll do everything we can to hold these officers accountable. As he left James's office, Marcus felt a wave of relief mixed with anxiety. He knew he had started a long and difficult battle, but something inside him told him it was the right thing to do. It wasn't just for him. It was for everyone who had ever been treated unjustly simply for being who they were. When he got home, he found Lena in the living room, flipping through a magazine. She looked up at him curiously. So, how did the meeting with the lawyer go? Marcus sat down on the couch next to his sister, sighing. It went well. We're going to sue the officers and the police department for racial discrimination. Lena raised her eyebrows, clearly impressed. You're not messing around, huh? I can't, Lena. This has to stop. I can't let this keep happening to me or anyone else. She nodded, a proud smile forming on her lips. You're braver than you think, Marcus. This isn't a small fight. He gave a faint smile, feeling his sister's support. I know, but I'm a Marine, remember? Tough fights don't scare me. Lena laughed. Well, in that case, I'd better start making a sign for the court. My brother is a hero. Marcus smiled wider this time, feeling a lightness he hadn't felt since the incident. No matter how difficult the battle ahead might be, he knew he wasn't alone. With the support of his family and the strength of his experience as a Marine, he was more than ready to fight for justice. The process was underway, and Marcus knew this fight would be long and exhausting, both emotionally and physically. But he was determined. This wasn't just about a personal victory. It was about sending a clear message to society that no one, regardless of their skin color, should be judged unfairly. Now, Marcus's story was just beginning to echo. The days following the decision to sue the Charleston Police Department were tense for Marcus. He knew the legal battle would be long and emotionally draining, but there was no turning back. James Wilkins, the lawyer, had already started building the case, gathering testimonies and seeking evidence of racial discrimination in the police officers' actions. Marcus found himself spending more time at James's office than he had ever imagined. Each meeting reinforced the gravity of the situation and the scale of what was at stake. On an especially hot day, Marcus and James sat in the small conference room of the lawyer's office, reviewing documents and statements. James looked at Marcus thoughtfully. I managed to talk to the police department, and guess what? There are no security camera images from that part of the park where you were stopped. They say the surveillance system was down in that area. Marcus scoffed, incredulous. Convenient, isn't it? Seems like there's always a technical problem when it's convenient for them. James nodded, sharing Marcus's skepticism. Unfortunately, this happens a lot. But we still have your statement and the fact that you're a respected Marine. That's going to work in our favor. Marcus knew that his veteran status shouldn't be necessary for him to be treated with respect, but he recognized that, in court, it could be a crucial advantage. He sighed and looked at James with a determined expression. I'm not doing this just for myself, James. I want this to make a difference. I'm tired of hearing about cases of discrimination, of people being treated like suspects just because of their skin color. James crossed his arms and leaned forward as if sharing a confidence. I know, Marcus, but you need to be prepared for the repercussions. These officers will try to defend themselves, and the police department will probably back them up. You could be exposed in the media, criticized, and some people will try to paint you as the villain in this story. Marcus stared at the lawyer, his voice firm. I don't care what they say. What matters is that they know they can't keep doing this. I served my country, and now I'm going to fight here, at home, so others don't have to go through what I did. James smiled, admiring Marcus's determination. Good. Then let's fight. I've already filed the formal complaint, and now we just have to wait for the trial. I'll do everything I can to ensure these officers are held accountable. The days that followed were intense. Marcus began to feel the weight of the local media's interest in his case. Reporters tried to approach him for interviews, and the name Marcus Jackson started appearing in Charleston's newspapers and news broadcasts. One morning, Marcus was on his mother's porch, drinking coffee, when Lena appeared with a newspaper in hand, her expression full of concern. Have you seen this, Marcus? She asked, throwing the newspaper onto the table. Marcus picked up the paper and read the headline: Marine Veteran Sues Police Department, Alleges Racial Discrimination. He took a deep breath, closing his eyes for a moment. He knew this was coming, but seeing his name in print was still unsettling. Lena watched him closely. They're turning this into a big circus, and people are already saying you're overreacting, that the police were just doing their job. Marcus looked at his sister, his expression tense. Of course they're going to say that, Lena. They always do. There's always an excuse for abuse of power. But the truth is, if I were white, I would never have been stopped like that. And that's what I want people to understand. Lena sat down next to him, still looking worried. I know, Marcus, but I'm worried about you. The media can be cruel. And those officers? Who knows what they'll do to defend themselves? Are you really prepared for what's coming? Marcus smiled at his sister, trying to reassure her. I've faced enemies in much worse situations than this. I'm prepared. And this time, the fight is for something I deeply believe in. I'm not backing down now. Lena nodded, still concerned but confident in her brother. I just want you to take care of yourself, okay? Don't let this situation consume you. I'll do my best, Marcus replied with a slight smile. The trial was set for a few months later, but preparations were already in full swing. During one of the meetings at James's office, they were informed that the officer's defense would argue that the stop was standard procedure and that there was no racial discrimination, just precaution due to suspicious circumstances in the park. Suspicious circumstances? I was just biking, Marcus said, outraged, clenching his fists. James raised his hands, trying to calm him. I know, Marcus. That's part of their strategy. They're going to argue they had legitimate reasons to stop you, and that your skin color had nothing to do with it. Marcus scoffed, frustrated. That's always the excuse, isn't it? As if stopping a black man aggressively is just protocol. James nodded, understanding Marcus's frustration. Exactly, but we'll fight that in court. We have your statements, the lack of a real justification for the stop, and the fact that you are a respectable citizen. We'll expose the flaws in their argument. Marcus looked at James with his usual determination. I trust you, James. Let's do this right. The night before the trial, Marcus felt a mix of anxiety and hope. He knew the trial wouldn't just be about what happened to him, but about all the times black people were treated as suspects simply for existing in public spaces. He was about to confront a system that had long failed to protect those it was supposed to protect. At dinner, his mother, Angela, said a prayer before they began to eat. God, give my son the strength to face this battle. May he find justice not just for himself, but for all who have gone through what he has. Marcus closed his eyes, silently thanking for the strength his mother and family had always given him. He knew he wouldn't be alone the next day, and that gave him the courage he needed. Now, everything was at stake. The courtroom would be the battlefield, and Marcus was ready to fight for something bigger than himself. On the morning of the trial, Marcus woke up earlier than usual. The sky was still dark, and a strange quiet filled the air, as if the entire city knew it would be an important day. As he left the house, dressed in a dark blue suit that Lena had helped him choose, he felt the weight of what was to come. Angela was in the kitchen making coffee, and she approached him for a hug. It's going to be all right, son. We're all with you, she said, with a soft smile but eyes full of worry. Thank you, Mom, Marcus replied, feeling the warmth of her support. I know it won't be easy, but I'll face this with everything I've got. As he left, Lena and Angela stayed behind, while Marcus drove towards the courthouse. Approaching it, he saw small groups of people gathered outside, some with cameras, others with signs of support. He took a deep breath before parking the car. He wasn't used to so much attention, but he knew the case had become a symbol of something greater. Inside the courthouse, James Wilkins was already waiting for him in the waiting room. The lawyer, always professional, gave him a firm handshake. Ready for the day, Marcus? He asked, with a serious but reassuring look. Ready. Let's do this, Marcus replied with conviction. Before entering the courtroom, James gave a brief rundown of what to expect. What's going to happen today is basically the opening statements from both sides. The defense will try to convince the jury that the stop was legal and there was no discrimination. Our job is to show that the only reason you were stopped was because of the color of your skin. Marcus nodded. He was ready to be scrutinized, knowing his word would be pitted against the city's police system, but his determination didn't waver. As they entered the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. The judge, an elderly man with a stern expression, was seated at the front, while the defense lawyers, representing officers Carter and Simmons, were already in position. Carter, the officer who had been the most aggressive during the stop, glanced quickly at Marcus before looking away. When the judge called the session to order, James was the first to rise and present Marcus's case. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we are here today to speak about justice. Marcus Jackson, a Marine Corps veteran, was stopped and humiliated by two police officers solely because of the color of his skin. There is no other explanation for what happened in that park. The stop was based on prejudice, and that's why we're here, to ensure this does not go unpunished. Marcus watched as James spoke with firmness. He felt a mix of pride and responsibility. He knew his story was now in the hands of the court, but he believed that the truth would speak for itself. When it was time for the defense attorney, Richard Collins, to present the officers' arguments, the tone was completely different. Ladies and gentlemen, my clients, Officers Carter and Simmons, are dedicated police officers who were simply doing their duty to protect our city. The stop of Mr. Jackson was based on suspicious behavior, not racial discrimination. We will prove that these officers acted within the law and according to police standards. Marcus felt a surge of anger rise within him. Suspicious behavior, he thought. He knew that narrative was an attempt to mask the prejudice he had suffered. He exchanged a look with James, who discreetly signaled for him to remain calm. During the lunch break, Marcus, James, and Lena, who had joined them at the courthouse, went to a nearby cafe to rest before the session continued. I can't believe what I heard, Marcus. Suspicious behavior? Are they really trying to use that excuse? Lena said, still visibly upset. That's part of their strategy, Lena. They're going to try to make it seem like there was a legitimate reason. But we know the truth, Marcus replied, trying to stay calm. James, ever the strategist, intervened. They're going to use every excuse possible, and we need to be prepared for that. Today was just the beginning. The next step is crucial. When you take the stand, it will be your chance to tell your story. Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of the lawyer's words. He knew his testimony would be the cornerstone of the trial. I need to be ready for whatever comes. Lena looked at him with pride, but also a touch of concern. You're going to do this right, Marcus. We're all behind you. Back in the courtroom, the most delicate part of the day was about to begin. The testimonies. Marcus watched as the first to testify was Officer Carter. He took the stand with a confident posture, as if he was convinced he had done nothing wrong. Officer Carter, can you explain why you and your partner decided to stop Mr. Jackson that day? Asked Collins, the defense attorney. Well, we were patrolling the park when we noticed a man repeatedly circling on a bicycle. He seemed to be avoiding eye contact and was in an area where there had been reports of bike theft. We decided to stop him to ensure everything was in order. Marcus shook his head slightly, incredulous at the narrative the officer was constructing. That wasn't true. He had just been riding his bike, enjoying his afternoon. James stood up. Officer Carter, at any point during this stop, did Mr. Jackson resist? Carter hesitated before answering. No, James pressed on, firmly. And when he presented his military ID, why did you then humiliate him and keep him standing under surveillance while verifying his information, Ev? Carter was visibly uncomfortable with the question. We were just following standard procedure. James looked directly at the jury before turning back to, does this standard procedure apply to everyone, or only to those you consider suspicious because of their skin color? The silence that followed was deep. Marcus knew this moment was crucial, and he could see on the faces of some jurors that the question had hit a sensitive spot. The defense could try to justify the stop however they wanted, but James was determined to expose the true motivations behind the officer's actions. The first day of the trial ended with Marcus feeling exhausted, yet hopeful. He knew the road ahead would still be long, but seeing the defense hesitate under James' questioning strengthened him. The courtroom was a new kind of battlefield for him, different from the ones he had faced as a Marine. But one thing was certain. he wasn't going to back down. As he left the courthouse, Lena was waiting for him outside. "You were amazing today, Marcus." They know they can't hide the truth forever. Marcus hugged her, grateful for her support. "We still have a long way to go, but I'm ready. We're going to get justice, Lena. For me, for all of us." With that, Marcus was more determined than ever to see the fight through to the end. The second day of the trial was even more critical than the first. Marcus knew that this would be the day when he'd have the chance to tell his side of the story. He would be called to the witness stand and would have to relive that humiliating day in front of everyone, including the officers who had stopped him. The courtroom was packed, with journalists, members of Charleston's Black community, and several veterans who had served with Marcus in the Marines. He could feel the tension in the air, but also the support from those who were there for him. When the judge called the session back to order, James approached Marcus and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Are you ready?" asked the attorney, his tone calm and confident. Marcus took a deep breath and nodded. "More than ever. Let's finish this." The judge asked for Marcus to be called to the witness stand. As he stood up and walked to the front, he could feel all eyes on him. In the back of the room, Lena and Angela watched anxiously, but also with pride. When Marcus took his seat at the stand, the entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. James approached to begin the questioning, standing firm and professional. "Mr. Jackson, can you tell us what happened that day in the park? From the moment you left home, what were you doing, and how were you approached by Officers Carter and Simmons?" Marcus nodded, adjusting himself in the witness chair before speaking. His voice was clear and steady, even under the pressure of reliving it all. "I left my house that afternoon to go for a bike ride in the park. I've always done that. It's a way to relax after a long week. When I was in the park, I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. I was just enjoying the day, riding along the bike path, until I heard a siren." Marcus paused briefly, recalling the shock of the moment. "That's when I saw the police car pulling up. They stopped next to me, and suddenly, they jumped out of the car aggressively." James nodded, encouraging him to continue. "And what happened next?" "They got out with their hands close to their weapons, and Officer Carter didn't waste any time. He said, 'What are you doing here? Where'd you get that bike?' The way he said it, the tone, it was like he had already decided I was a criminal." The courtroom was silent. Everyone was listening intently to Marcus' words, especially the jury. "I told them I was just riding my bike and that it was mine, but they didn't seem to believe me. Carter ordered me to get off the bike and lean against the car. I hadn't done anything wrong, but I knew that if I resisted, I could end up arrested, or worse. So, I complied." James stepped a little closer, his eyes fixed on Marcus. "When they searched you, did the officers find any reason to suspect you?" "No, of course not. I was just riding my bike, like I said, but that didn't stop them from continuing their aggressive approach. They asked for my ID, and I showed them my military ID. When Officer Carter saw that I was a Marine, he hesitated for a moment. It looked like he realized he'd made a mistake, but instead of apologizing, they kept treating me like a threat." James paused, letting those words hang in the air before continuing. "And how did that make you feel, Marcus?" The question hit a sensitive spot. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to control the emotion rising inside him. "Humiliated. That's how I felt. I served my country, risked my life, and still, I was treated like a criminal. Just because I'm black. If I were white, I know that stop wouldn't have gone the same way." There was a murmur in the room. Marcus looked at the jury, and some of the jurors were clearly moved by his words. The pain and indignation in his voice were undeniable. James proceeded with one more question. "After showing your military ID and complying with everything the officers asked, what happened?" "They held me there for a few more minutes, checking my information, as if they were still looking for a reason to arrest me. When they finally let me go, there were no apologies. They just said, 'You're free to go.' Like what they did was normal, like I should just accept being treated that way." Marcus paused, looking at James, who nodded in approval. He knew this was his chance to speak from the heart. "I could have let it go, like so many others do, but I couldn't, because it wasn't the first time something like this happened, and if I didn't do something, it certainly wouldn't be the last. I'm not here just for myself, but for all the men and women who've been treated like suspects because of the color of their skin. This has to stop." The silence in the room was heavy. The depth of Marcus' experience seemed to have touched everyone present, and even the defense attorneys were visibly uncomfortable. James concluded his questioning with one final question. "Mr. Jackson, what do you hope to achieve with this lawsuit?" Marcus looked directly at the jury before answering. "I want justice, not just for me, but for every black person who's ever been treated as less because of prejudice. I want these officers to be held accountable for what they did so that others won't have to go through what I went through. And I want a future where men and women like me can walk the streets, ride bikes in parks, and live their lives without fear of being humiliated by the people who are supposed to protect them." When Marcus finished speaking, the impact of his words was palpable. James looked at him with pride before calmly saying, "No further questions, Your Honor." The defense had its chance to cross-examine Marcus, trying to undermine his testimony. Defense attorney Richard Collins stood up and approached the witness stand. "Mr. Jackson, you mentioned that you were stopped because the officers thought your behavior was suspicious. However, as a military veteran, you understand that safety is a priority. Don't you think that, in the context of patrolling, the officers were simply trying to maintain order?" Marcus stayed calm, but his voice grew firmer. "It's not about maintaining order. It's about how you treat people. They treated me like I was a criminal before they even knew who I was. If I were white, I know it would have been different. I was never treated as a threat during my time in the military. It was only when I came back home that this started happening." Collins tried a few more questions, but he couldn't shake Marcus' testimony. In the end, it was clear that the truth was on Marcus' side. After Marcus' testimony, the day came to a close. He left the courtroom exhausted, but with a strange sense of relief. Lena and Angela were waiting outside, tears in their eyes. "You were incredible, Marcus," Lena said, hugging her brother tightly. "You're making a difference." Angela, always the quiet one, smiled at her son and held his hand. "I'm so proud of you, my son. So proud." Marcus felt the support of his family, but he knew there was still a long road ahead. The trial was far from over, but today, he had taken an important step toward justice. The third day of the trial began with a tense atmosphere in the courtroom. Marcus, still energized from his testimony the day before, entered the room with a sense of determination. Lena and Angela were there again, sitting in the same row, offering their quiet but powerful support. James approached Marcus as the session began, explaining what was coming next. "Today, we're bringing in witnesses who can help corroborate your story and show that the officers' actions were indeed motivated by racial bias." Marcus nodded, knowing how important this was. He was determined to shed light on what had happened and seek justice not just for himself, but for others who had experienced similar situations. The judge called the session to order, and James stood to present his first witness, Carlos, a longtime friend of Marcus who had also witnessed the incident. Carlos was an average-sized man with a serious, yet confident expression. James gave a brief introduction. "Carlos, you were at the park on the day Mr. Jackson was stopped. Can you tell us what you saw?" Carlos took a deep breath and looked at the jury. "Yes, I was there. I saw Marcus riding his bike calmly. He wasn't doing anything wrong. Suddenly, I saw the police car approaching. I thought they were headed somewhere else, but instead, they stopped next to Marcus." "And what did you do?" James asked, encouraging Carlos to continue. "I kept watching, thinking it would be a routine stop. But as the situation escalated, I saw that Marcus was being treated very aggressively. He was just riding his bike, and suddenly, he became a suspect. I was shocked." James' gaze became more intense. "Did you notice any reason why the officers specifically approached Marcus?" Carlos hesitated, carefully choosing his words. "No, there was no reason. He wasn't doing anything wrong. It seemed like they were more interested in intimidating him than doing their job." James thanked Carlos and took his seat, while the defense rose to cross-examine. Collins began pressing Carlos. "Carlos, you were standing far enough away. Couldn't it be that Marcus was, in fact, acting suspiciously?" Carlos responded, his voice firm. "No, he wasn't suspicious. I've known Marcus for years. He's a good person and would never do anything wrong. The only thing suspicious I saw was the way the officers treated him. The juror on the left took notes, and some of the others seemed to agree with Carlos' statement. The defense attorney didn't look satisfied, but he had no more questions. After Carlos' testimony, James brought the next witness, Ms. Evelyn, an elderly woman from the community who frequently walked in the park and had a clear view of what had happened. Her presence brought a sense of gravity to the courtroom. Ms. Evelyn, can you tell us what you saw on the day Mr. Jackson was stopped? James asked. She adjusted her glasses and looked at the jury, her voice soft but full of authority. I was walking in the park when I saw the young man. He looked so happy riding his bike. And then, suddenly, those officers showed up. What shocked me most was how they acted, as if he were a dangerous criminal. I've never seen a police officer act like that with a white man. Marcus felt his heart warm at the sound of Ms. Evelyn's words. Can you tell us if there was any behavior on Marcus' part that justified the stop? James continued. No, absolutely not. He wasn't doing anything, just enjoying himself. It's heartbreaking to see how skin color can change everything. Her words echoed through the room, and a few jurors nodded, clearly moved. After Ms. Evelyn's testimony, the defense attorney tried to challenge her credibility. Ms. Evelyn, you were standing at a distance, weren't you? How can you be certain of what was happening? I was close enough to see. And, more importantly, I'm a black woman living in this community. I've seen this before. I know what it means to be treated differently because of the color of your skin. The defense had no more questions, and Ms. Evelyn left the stand with a dignified expression. As the session closed for the day, Marcus felt a growing sense of hope. The witnesses James had brought were powerful, leaving a strong impression on the jury. As Marcus exited the courtroom, he found Lena and Angela waiting for him, proud smiles on their faces. Did you see? They had no way to argue against the truth. Lena exclaimed. I'm so proud of you, son. You're doing an amazing job, Angela said, wrapping Marcus in a warm embrace. It's not just me. It's all of us. The support I've received is what keeps me strong, Marcus replied, looking out at the crowd gathered outside the courthouse. He knew the fight was far from over, but for now, he was surrounded by love and support, and that gave him the strength to keep going. The fourth day of the trial arrived, and the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Marcus felt more nervous than he had on the previous days, knowing that the verdict was about to be decided. The courtroom was packed with friends, family, and supporters, all ready to hear what the jury had to say. James, his attorney, was focused and prepared for anything. He approached Marcus before the session began. Today's the day, Marcus. The jury has heard all the testimony, and now it's your turn to wait. Keep the faith. I'm anxious. I just hope they see the truth, Marcus replied, glancing at the jury as they entered the room. The judge soon arrived, and the courtroom fell silent. The judge asked the jury to rise, and then inquired if they had reached a verdict. The foreman, a middle-aged man with a serious expression, stood. Your Honor, we have reached a verdict. The tension in the air was palpable. Marcus held Lena's hand, squeezing it gently. Please, 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 Lena whispered, while Angela stared intently at the foreman, her eyes full of hope. In the case of Marcus Jackson versus Officers Carter and Simmons, we find the defendants guilty of abuse of power and misconduct. A murmur spread through the room. Marcus felt a mix of relief and disbelief. What does this mean? Lena asked as Marcus looked at James, who broke into a wide smile. It means you won, Marcus. A joyful smile spread across Marcus' face. He could hardly believe it. The judge then continued. The jury recommends that the court impose sanctions on the defendants and that Mr. Jackson be awarded fair compensation for his experiences. I thank the jury for their hard work on this case. The judge's words sounded like music to Marcus' ears. He turned to Angela, who was in tears, and hugged her tightly. We did it, Mom. We did it. Angela, in a state of shock, nodded, smiling. I knew you would do it, my son. I always believed in you. Lena jumped into Marcus' arms, exclaiming, This is amazing. You did it. You really did it. The courtroom was in an uproar, with supporters applauding and many emotional faces. Marcus' victory was not just a personal triumph, but a win for the entire community fighting against prejudice and injustice. After the trial, the following months were a whirlwind. Marcus became a prominent figure in the fight for civil rights and racial equality in Charleston. He began speaking at community events, sharing his story and encouraging others to stand up against injustice. At one of these talks, Marcus said, "Each of us has the power to make a difference. We must not let fear or doubt stop us from fighting for what is right. When we stand together, we are stronger." The audience gave him a standing ovation, and Marcus felt the energy and solidarity of the community. One night, while Marcus was gazing at the starry sky, Lena joined him on the porch. "It's amazing how everything has changed, isn't it?" she asked, looking out at the horizon. "Yeah, it is. But there's still so much to be done. This fight doesn't end here." "I know, but you've already done so much. You've given a voice to so many who didn't have one." Marcus smiled, grateful for his sister's support. He knew the fight for equality would continue, but now he had a platform and a community standing with him. Angela appeared, carrying drinks and smiling. "What are you two talking about?" "The future and what we can do from here," Marcus replied. Angela sat down, looking her son in the eyes. "I'm so proud of you, Marcus. You didn't just fight for yourself, you fought for all of us. And this is just the beginning. We need to keep fighting together, because the change starts here and now." The day of the verdict was a milestone, but the real victory was in the changes Marcus and his community would continue to push for. He promised never to stop fighting for justice, not just for himself, but for everyone facing prejudice. As they looked up at the stars, Marcus felt a renewed sense of hope and the certainty that the fight for equality and justice was only just beginning. And with that, he felt stronger than ever, knowing he wasn't alone in this journey.